First of all, my name is Joy. I'm the program assistant for Bodies of Work. Just in case you missed the weird voice saying it to you when you came in, this is being recorded. We also have Nicole here who is doing CART. So if you need the captions, we are doing live captions for you all today. Go ahead and feel free to turn those on if you haven't already, if you'd like them. We also have Bree Noonan who's here, who is going to be helping as an access doula. So if you need some help throughout the session, you're welcome to private message them. Or if you can't manage to get to the private message, of course, feel free to interrupt with your voice for help. Bree will help you, or if Bree is busy or you need a different kind of help, I will also be here to help you. So just be aware that that's there for you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bodies of Work first, and then we'll hand it over to Auden in just a moment. So this session is brought to you by Bodies of Work. Auden is a 3 arts artist resident for Bodies of Work. We are a network that serves as a catalyst for the development of disability arts and culture that illuminates disability experience in new and unexpected ways. It is a consortium of 4 programs at 3 Chicago institutions that share a commitment to disability artistry, academics, and activism. And the different organizations, we have 2 at the University of Illinois, Chicago, their program on disability art and art, culture, and humanities, and the Disability Cultural Center. We have the Disability Cultural Activism Lab, which is at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then we have the Art and Cultural Project at Access Living. So those are all of our partners that come together to create Bodies of Work and bring you Auden Granger today. Auden's pronouns are they, them. They're Chicago-based paper collage artist, theater technician, and disability justice activist who creates intricate mosaics entirely from found and reused paper. Their work is guided by a disability perspective that sees the beauty in going slow and the inherent artistry in using what you've got. You can explore their work at their website, which I will drop into the chat in case you would like to check it out later. And it's also in the links, I believe, that you use to do other things, like to sign up. So hopefully you've got a chance to see them. If not, there it is for you. Auden, I'm going to hand it over to you and mute myself for the rest of the session, unless you need me.
Joy,
Great.
can I just already advocate for myself is that I find the chat impossible. So is there any way that any information that you're going to share could be emailed to us?
Yeah, we can make sure that that stuff goes out to you later. I think, Auden, aside from your link to your website, is there anything else that you're expecting to share that would go into the chat?
I'll share a link to one of the documents that's in the Google Drive folder, but everything should be in the Google Drive folder.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
And the Google Drive folder was sent out with the link for today, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
so you should
yeah.
also have that already. So we'll just make sure you get
Oh, great.
Auden's link too.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, it causes me anxiety to worry about how to figure out the chat. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, no worries. And thank you so much for advocating for yourself early. Like, please feel free to do so early and often, everybody. All right.
It was hard, but thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. I'm sure there's others who want it too. So no worries.
I'm glad to have you here. Joy, thank you so much for that introduction and for being here. You have been so helpful over the course of this residency, so I really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for being here, for having me here in your space from this distance. This is the first time that I have ever given a workshop about my art. So I hope you will be generous with me just as much as you will be generous with yourselves. There's a solid mix of people in the room who know me, people who don't. There's also a mix of people who are disabled and chronically ill and people who are not. I think we have about a 75-25 split. And I also know there's a lot of people who have an academic background in disability studies and people who don't. So I'll speak to everybody, and hopefully if something doesn't resonate with you, the next thing will. It was really important to me to be able to hold this workshop virtually, to send out the materials kits. I find that hybrid workshops are actually really miserable if you are in the virtual audience, and they make me feel more isolated. And ultimately, it would be really hypocritical for me to do this workshop just in person, since my artistic practice has developed over these years in my home. And my work is so rooted in the experience of being in my living space and the year and a half or so where I was mostly homebound because of illness. So enabling making art at home, wherever you are, including with those tangible materials, was really critical for me. I have a really specific way of making art. I use these little strips laid end to end, but I don't think that the particular techniques that I use are what is most important for me to share with you. So we can talk more about those specifics, but I would rather help you find ways to make art that are meaningful to you, and the ideologies that guide how I make stuff are probably better tools to do that. But if you do like my thing, by all means, I'd love to share. I'd love to see what you make, and we'll talk more about that. Mostly, I want to talk about this found materials component and a specific way of thinking about and defining art. So the structure here, I'll do some talking interspersed with some visuals and some prompts for action, and you are welcome and encouraged to work while I'm talking. I know that can be really difficult. That would be difficult for me. So if you want to just listen and work later, that is also fine. I'll ask some guiding questions that you can answer aloud or in the chat, or just integrate into what you are making. Obviously, I have this camera setup of my desk. This is pretty new to me also, so that you can see my workspace and my hands. I'm not doing a PowerPoint. I'm just going to do this because that's kind of my whole deal. Putting stuff out in the real world, engaging with it physically, being limited to what I can put in my physical space. So I want to start by talking a little bit about disability arts and culture. I know some people in the room are really familiar with that, involved in those academic spaces, and some people are not. I've put some readings in the Google Drive folder if it feels unfamiliar and also interesting to you. So they're not mandatory. Again, there's no quiz, but I think especially if you're disabled or chronically ill, they can be really helpful and even transformative. So even if you're disabled, I wouldn't say, you don't have to do the reading. Disability arts and culture looks at disability as a way of understanding the world. So seeing disability as a way of conceptualizing ourselves, our relationships to each other, our relationships to broader systems, and then exploring that through artistic methods. So it explores broader themes about embodiment, about difference, about mortality, about fear of weakness and loss and death, but also the joy and celebration and meaning that can come from interdependence, from relying on each other, being connected to one another, and living in that particular way that involves moving slowly and considering and adapting. So it explores those themes, not just in the content of the final work, but in the process, the materials, the methodology. I've pulled out this piece in particular. This is a piece by me that feels very indicative of the way I think about disability arts and culture. It is focused around the theme of mortality. The text says, "I will be beautiful in my casket." And the piece is called "As You Are, So Shall I Be." And it also looks at change and decay. It grounds that in my own body by using my own image. And it's also made with that aspect of a very slow process, that meticulousness. So it forces me to sit with the process and with the imagery, both in making these kind of detailed lines along both sides, but also in physically tearing this cover that is over this image of my own face and body. So what I would like you to do now is take a look at the materials that are in front of you. Hopefully you have some materials. Either you have a kit that was provided by us, or you have some paper that you've gathered yourself. If you don't, this can also just be a brainstorming exercise. But I would like to know what those materials prompt for you. Just right off the bat, I have some sub questions, but does anything occur just to begin with about these materials? You can put it in the chat or speak aloud, or we can move forwards.
I'm sorry, would you clarify the question, please?
Yeah, so you have materials in front of
Right.
you, either from the kit you received or that you've gathered yourself. Just wondering if you have anything immediately that you want to say that you're reflecting on with those materials.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're like presents, gifts, gratitude.
I love that. Yeah, to get materials from somebody else is like receiving a gift.
Precious gifts, yeah.
Is there anything that if you got a kit or if you looked at the list of materials guidance, anything that didn't seem like it was art to you or seemed like it could be art?
My kit had Band-Aids in it, and I'm very excited to make art with Band-Aids.
Yeah, the Band-Aids are interesting. You can certainly use those to make art. My intention was to think about those as maybe a way that you could wrap your tools. So I use these really specific scissors, but so they're wide handled so that I can hold them well. But even then they were hurting my hands, so I wrapped them in this specific way. But I couldn't send out a full roll of cloth tape. So I thought they might be useful for that, but I'd also love to see what you make with Band-Aids too. It looks like in the chat, people are talking about some imagery that came up in particular, something from New Orleans, a lot of water, using those images as base. This idea of, Danny says, I have a couple of old planners that I meant to use and didn't really get to, or only partially did. So there's conflicting elements of not having used them as intended while also repurposing them. I like that a lot, that idea of repurposing something, using it as intended as well, or not completely using it as intended, but then bringing it into a new environment. And then again, some ideas about what the actual material, what the actual imagery in the paper is.
Battery 50%.
I think that's my mom.
Oops. Sorry.
Mute your camera, please. So you've taken a look at your materials. I've asked about your initial ideas. I have two questions about the materials. What do the materials make you think about other materials? What do they tell you about the things that are around you? Do they make you think of anything differently? Do they prompt you to give a second look to anything that you might not normally consider as being a tool for art? So you've received the Google document of materials guidance. If you'd like to take another look at that and possibly add something, there's space in that document to add. Bree, if you could share that link in the chat. If that feels like a useful way to brainstorm, I'd love to see it. Anything when you pulled these materials together that you didn't think was related to art, or it pulled you towards something else? For instance, for me, we got a lot of aluminum foil from a donation from somebody through Chicago Reduce Waste. I had never used aluminum foil before, but when it was framed there as an art material, it made me think about it in a new way. Bree?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I did drop the document in the chat, and also I sent it via email for Tahila to be able to access it. So I just wanted to flag that so that you don't have to access the chat to get to the document. Also, Auden, would it be helpful if I managed the chat and just raised my hand periodically to read out what was going, or would you prefer to manage it?
I think I'm okay managing it, but thank you so much,
Awesome.
and I'll let you know if that changes.
Okay,
A-
cool.
And yeah, I feel terrible to say this, but I am so excited and want to take in every piece of this. I have so much anxiety about the chat. So all I'm going to ask is, I don't want to even, I'm on my phone. I don't own a computer. So is there a way, like, can I get a recording and a copy of the chat later?
Yeah, I'm also reading aloud everything that is put in the chat.
Okay, okay.
I'm summarizing some things that I think are important for the structure of the workshop.
Right.
But so everything's going to be read aloud. You should be able to access every component.
Thank you. I
And we
just know
are
that some
recording.
people copy the chat. Like, so is there a way to get a copy of that after? Like,
Yeah,
you
we are
know,
do that too.
recording, and so it should automatically create like a transcript of the
perfect,
chat for us.
perfect.
And I'm gonna send all those materials out to Auden, and Auden will probably, you plan to send it to all the participants, correct?
Yep.
Okay,
Okay, great.
awesome.
Thank you. I feel very taken care of. I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
You can
You're all
speak up
good.
anytime you need. It's fine. We're happy to have you here.
Yep, glad to have you here. So a couple things from the chat that people have raised regarding this question. Christina shared that the sheet music was a nice surprise. I would never have used that in a collage because it's meant to be used for reading and singing. So that is a completely different use of this material. That is a great point. You noted I'd hate to cut it into pieces. No worries, I've cut it into pieces already. Danny mentioned tissues or tissue paper are something that works really well for adding 3D elements or dimension or texture as well. Not something I'd really worked with in years until it came up in a sensory art therapy class I attended a couple weeks ago. So that's another interesting example of getting a single technique or a single element from one environment from the sensory art therapy class, and then being able to apply it across the board to art that you make at another time. Bree, have people added anything in this Google Doc?
I'm just
I
gonna
don't
scroll
think
down and
so.
take a look. Not yet, but like Auden said, folks, feel free to add on and explore on the document.
Yeah, or just
I'll
think
I'll
about it.
add verbally since I can't do the
Yes.
chat or the document. I love when I get the ideas not from seeing the materials, but by like touching them and playing with them, and that there's like a happy accident. For example, I discovered something about glue that I never knew before, but I wouldn't have learned that by just looking at the glue and thinking of it. It was by using it the way I, thought I was supposed to, and then it did something else. So I really love these presents of getting things that I can like touch and, move around and then get the idea from the material.
Yeah, there's a really wonderful tactile element in collage and that element of working with things that are unexpected based on the restriction of the materials. So my other question, and people have started to answer this, is whether these materials prompt you towards any particular subject matter, any particular work of art. You don't have to answer that one aloud. You should just start looking at what you have in front of you and starting to piece together a layout, if that makes sense with the materials you have. So I'm going to bring forward a quote. Again, I really like the idea of working with something physical, having to handwrite it. So this is the way that I'll bring these forwards today. It says, being creative is not so much the desire to do something as the listening to that which wants to be done, the dictation of the materials. And this is a quote by Annie Athers. I'm reading this a little bit more critically than it's initially framed. I think being creative is the desire to do something, but it's accompanied by listening to the materials, to that which wants to be done. So that isn't the entirety of what being creative is, but I think it can be a tool and a guiding framework. So take a look, see if there's anything in your selection of paper that you want to make a centerpiece, that you want to build your work around. Is there anything that the materials are dictating, anything that they want to be done? So if there's nothing that seems really right to you there, I'll propose some other methods or formats that you might work with. And it's also completely okay if you don't leave today with a finished work of art, or if you don't even leave with something sort of laid out and drafted. There's a lot of other ways to think about things creatively and engage with these structures. So while you're looking at and arranging your materials, or if you prefer to pause to listen, I want to talk about that aspect of working within restrictions. So I'm a collage artist, so I'm always pulling material from other places, including this other quote. It makes sense that quotes in text would be part of that. So this is by poet Gwyneth Lewis in her poem, Angel of Healing. It's quoted by Petra Kupper in one of the articles that is in the Google Drive folder. Every disease is a work of art if you play it rightly. By this he meant, whatever the form imposed by arthritis or by the gout, your job's to compose yourself around about its formal restrictions and make that sing. So once again, I'm thinking about this a little more critically. I'm not sure I agree with this definition of disease. I'm not sure every disease is a work of art. Or maybe what I'm not sure about is that the way that you can turn disease into a work of art is by playing it rightly. That feels like a pretty heavy, unwarranted judgment. But I think maybe one way to play a disease is as art. It's one possible way to experience disease within the multiple ways that any ill person will engage that disease over the course of their illness. I do like the framework for art that this quote creates. Again, it's not the only definition, but I think one way to think about art is how you compose yourself around about its restrictions and make them sing. There's a lot of restrictions that this is relevant to. There's the restrictions of your body and of disease, which the quote explicitly speaks to, and which is clearly relevant to that aspect of disability arts and culture. There's the restriction of your environment and resources, which of course is informed by those previous two, but also by many other categories. And there's the restriction of your materials. And that's a key aspect of collage for me, found materials collage specifically, well beyond the idea that the materials dictate the work, that being creative is listening to that which wants to be done. So if I had anything at all available to me, which it really feels like we do, right? In this modern world where there's so many images and so much text at our fingertips, I really think I would just drown in it. And so starting with this restriction of materials prevents me from the overwhelm of starting with a blank page, which we hear from artists, from new artists all the time. Because it's not just starting with a blank page, it's starting with a seemingly infinite number of potential mediums. You could work in sculpture, you could work in oil paints, but working with paper, it guides my work not just to work with paper in general, but in a particular way, I'm not just making paper art. I'm not just working with these art supplies. What I'm making is specifically enabled through the work I've done already of gathering materials, and then recontextualizing those materials so that they go from being random paper, from being trash and ephemera, to being grounds for art. So these are just some of the pieces of paper that I have gathered in this little subcategory of this shade of purple. But restricting myself to found materials mostly is meaningful to me because it means that what I use is inherently relevant to my life and my world in a way beyond just my ability to purchase something. So each of these components is a piece of my environment. It's a representation of the people around me, even if I don't interact with them, the places I go, the things that are happening around me and to me, and the time in which I live. So I'm recontextualizing these materials from trash to art, but the materials are also contextualizing me and what I create within the bounds of my environment. I could only gather these specific materials and put them together in this specific way as I am and where I am, even if that is invisible in the final product. So that means a lot to me as someone who has felt so very tangibly isolated and disconnected, as I think we all have over the course of the pandemic, and as people who are chronically ill feel especially. So it kept me from feeling like I'm up here in my tower, disconnected from the rest of the world. To engage with my materials this way, to think about them as aspects of and signifiers of my world, made them connection points when other types of connection didn't feel available and also didn't feel meaningful. Not just because I was stuck in my home, but because I was ill and the experience of being ill is inherently isolating. So working with my materials, working with found materials, was a form of connection that was physical and not just virtual. But it wasn't just that it was physical, because I felt very bound to my body, to that aspect of context. So that wasn't what I was after. But it also offered an interdependence, a collaboration that tied me to my physical world in a way that didn't feel like a concession to my body, because it put me in conversation with all of art and industry and human history. So maybe that seems a little self-aggrandizing, but I think that's what it means to play it rightly, or at least it's one way to play it rightly. So as I said, contextualizing, recontextualizing, those are big recurring themes for me. Contextualizing materials as art, shifting their category from trash to something outdated, something used, to being art, and contextualizing myself through the materials, putting me within the context of these pieces of evidence of where I live, and then finally contextualizing the materials with each other. So collage is bringing things into conversation in a new way. It's stuff that would never lay side by side otherwise. So I've kept you on this image for a while. I want to show you some examples. I tried to find the big pieces of this paper to show, but I used it all up. Things don't really stick around here for very long, but I'm always picking up paper everywhere I go, all the time. And I picked up this cheesy little illustrated map of a town in New Mexico in one of these tourist magazines that's focused on a particular region. I picked it up when I was doing a road trip from my parents' house in Arizona back to Chicago, or maybe vice versa. And then a couple years later, I picked up an almost identical cheesy illustrated map of the town, the beach town in Delaware, where my best friend Muck and I were staying. So these maps were from very different locations, from different periods in my life, but visually almost indistinguishable. So I have two of the cards. I've made cards out of the paper that I used, the paper from those maps. But I have two cards that have little sections of them. You can't even really tell, but this one says Rehoboth Chamber of Commerce from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And this one says New Mexico Jeep Tours. So they look almost identical, but they are not related to each other at all, except in connection to each other through this work of art. Those are so close, they were probably made by the same person, but these, the rest of the images, the rest of the maps that these cards come from, certainly were not. They're very different places, some at very different times. I like to pull National Geographic magazines, other kinds of maps throughout history. And they're only connected to each other because they are all a similar shade of green, and because I pulled them together and matched them up like this. Because normally this is not how we sort and relate maps to each other. We don't make a pile of maps that are green, maps that are blue. But it's hard to deny that they belong together like this. So another example is a map of Millennium Park. I think some of these went out in the kits because I have quite a lot of these. This map is intended for guests at Millennium Park at a particular event at Jazz Fest. So it has event-specific markings of what is happening at each stage. But this map from the previous summer is my annotated map for working there at the park. So it has information about where you would go in dangerous weather conditions, about where Lost and Found is. It has different information because it's intended for this different audience. And I had another map, which again, I couldn't find, from a tourist book about Chicago that's given out at the airport, that is for a different audience entirely. It's for this potential audience, this abstraction of an audience that might someday visit the park. So bringing these maps together, they're the same location, but different purposes, compared to the previous one of different locations, but same imagery, brings them together in a different way than they were ever intended to. And that's really meaningful to me, even though I know that when I tear this up into 1/4 inch strips, which is a key part of the work I do, nobody will ever see it. So hopefully right now you are looking at your materials and thinking about them as materials, as components of your world, and thinking about them in relationship to each other, not just in isolation, but as parts of a whole, with you as a key piece in that whole. You are a hub in that wheel. So does anybody want to show that? Talk about where they are right now? Maybe you've pulled some things together that you want to use, or maybe you've started working on it. Again, if not, we can keep moving forwards. It looks like people are having fun with the foil. Danny is using the foil to crumple up and add stormy waves to a still water image. I love that. I love the shifting it from being an image of a certain world at the time the image was created to changing the conditions entirely through your work. Anybody else want to share?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really inspired by this piece. Oh no, it's blurry.
But it's an image of a street in New Orleans on this
Yeah.
big kind of like paper placemat kind of paper.
Yeah, and then I there we go. This picture I took out of an art book that I'm yeah, I cut it out and put up there like the sky. And then yeah, now I'm just looking through the materials to see how else I want to make New Orleans colorful.
That's great. Yeah, because that's a black and white image of a very colorful location. So
Right.
I love that you are bringing the color back into the black and white image through the way you relate the components to each other.
Yeah.
I started layering some pieces on my collage already, but I'm cutting out these little snippets of text that I think unintentionally center around like disability and the body when taken out of context. Like this is from a Star Trek collector's magazine, and it's a quote that says, "We're human. It's a feeling of being left behind." So like recontextualizing things from something that was originally like commercial and meaningless into a new context is, I think, an important part of your art, and also something I'm trying to incorporate. Also, my cat is playing with one of my discarded pieces of paper.
Amazing. Cats love collage. I have found cats especially love the paper backing on the tape. Yeah, that idea of taking things from commercial sources. There's a lot of magazines, a lot of catalogs. That's a big source of paper in the world we live in. We live in a very commercialized society, and so those kinds of things really surround us all the time. And I think it is so wonderful to be able to pull them together outside of that commercial context and again relate them to each other in a new way. So Danny says, I also have a little piece of a comic page that has scientists discussing a blood test. And I've noticed that several of the maps or travel locations are places I've been. That is another thing that I really adore about working with maps. I love that when people look at maps, they are immediately drawn to the locations that they have been to or locations that people they love live in. Somebody could look at the exact same image and get a completely different, pull out a completely different specific location from it because of what has meaning to them. So that is something really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Christina, you have put an image in here that I cannot click open right now. Bree, is that something that makes sense to open right now, or maybe we can take a look at it later?
We can, sorry, my dog was just barking very loud. I was able to download it. So I could, if you'd like me to screen share to show people, or I'm happy to have it downloaded and then it can be sent out later, whatever you feel like is best for your workflow.
Let's take a look at it later. There's a space in the Google Drive folder, which obviously I love a Google Drive folder, titled Share Your Work. So if you'd like to upload final pieces, anything along the way, it certainly doesn't have to be a final piece. I'd love to see every single component as you go. You can put it in that folder. So I think maybe now would be a good time for us to take a short break. It is 10:45 here. Does that seem good to everyone? Do we want to take about 5 minutes and then come back after that? You can continue working, continue doing your layout, or step away for a little bit. Sound good? Great. I'm going to stay in here, but I'm going to stop my video for just a minute. All right. I think we're about at time. Let me see. I think I've put everything back together. Great. All right. Let's look at some things people have said while we have had some work time. One question is about how long this workshop is. We have space in the Zoom until noon, so about an hour from now. But a lot of that time will be much looser space to work at your own pace, and we can talk about some specific questions. So it won't all be structured like this for the next hour. Mukshafe said, I'm excited because I requested a materials kit and didn't get my first choice. So I have to think harder about how to incorporate the pieces I was given into my own art making modalities. It's a fun challenge. I love that about found materials. That challenge exists no matter what you get, I feel like. So I'd love to hear that that is happening. Alex says, I haven't done collage stuff since I was little, and this has reminded me how fun it is. Good, I am glad. I love that this is a medium that is very accessible in the sense that you don't have to buy a bunch of supplies. You can make it with whatever you have at hand. And also, it can be really fun. You can do it at whatever level of seriousness and meticulousness that you want to. So it can just be taking some glue, some Elmer's glue, and cutting out a magazine, or it can be doing something really precise. Both are key elements, equally valuable. So glad to hear that. Cindy says, the materials I have gathered are different weights. Do you have suggestions for working with that? My biggest suggestion is to put it against a background that has an equal weight to your thickest component, just to kind of even things out. But I really love working with different weights. I think it can make a really fun effect. So I guess actually my greatest suggestion would be to have that be grounds to play and explore your materials. But we can talk more about the specifics of that when we get into some of that other work time. Kevi says, lately I've been doing a lot of collage on the walls in my office, but I haven't really done collage on paper before. This is so much fun. Again, I'm so glad it's so much fun. And as you can see from the wall behind me, I do a lot of collage on the walls too. All right, I'll move forwards.
Can I just add something
Yes.
verbally?
Absolutely.
I've never been given materials before like this, and I absolutely love it for so many different reasons. And two, I just want to mention, I mean, well, gosh, there's popping up. The idea of it being a gift is like, it's different than what I may have selected if it was up to me. And it's going with the theme now is that at the ripe old age of 58, I'm so tired of chasing after things that I think I should, or that I think I want. And I'm trying to be still and let things come to me. So it's like these materials, not only are they things I might not have chosen, but they give me messages. Like, so it's so much deeper than just the visual. I feel like it's, so anyway, the reason I like art is I don't feel like words, even English, come anywhere near explaining. So now I feel like I didn't say what I wanted to say.
No, I think that was really clear. That was great. Again, it's that aspect of working with found materials, working with things that are in your environment that have come to you, makes you think about those things in a different way. It shows
Yeah.
things that you might not normally think about. As I was saying about the maps, everybody finds something new based on Danny's comment that even though those maps were from me, from things people donated to me here in Chicago, Danny could still find things, places that they had been, all of that is a really wonderful element of found materials.
Right, and that just real quick adds
Yeah.
to the second important thing is that it's like really helps me feel less alone in that we're all connected, not because we have the exact same experience, that we can all relate to things. So I also really just want to verbalize that doing this with other people is like thrilling me beyond belief, because so much of my creative exploration has been isolative and secret. So I have this wish that we could all somehow be in person, and I want to work on a group collage. That's what's coming up for me. Like I love seeing other people's, and I want to like add to it or take, like something about
Yeah.
how we all weave together. We are a collage.
That's so true. I really appreciate that. I'm glad that it helps you feel more connected. It was really important to me that we could do a virtual workshop with materials, because I think those materials are such a key component, and they really can make you feel so connected. I would love to make a collage with all of you together. Beth says, I love that comment about getting a gift. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that comment as well. I also love that it just makes me think like, who held these materials before me, and like, who did this belong to? And so I feel like there's just like a story with that too.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I love that aspect of thinking about who held these materials before, who made them. So often, what I really love, I often get like airport magazines, and sometimes they have crosswords and things in the back, and sometimes those will already be filled in. Ah, I love that. One of my favorites. Great. We've had some wonderful ideas about working with the materials we have, talking about working together. So I just want to say that if you are not there, if looking at your materials, they didn't dictate anything, that process is slow. So maybe that process of taking things apart, bringing things together, looking at them in a new way, it can't really be sped up. It can't be forced. So if you're not there, please don't feel left behind. It's also hard to teach in a short online workshop. I guess 2 hours is not that short. A medium that is at its core about going slow. It celebrates slowness rather than suffering it. And when I say slow, I mean slow as in months and years, and slow at every step. I tried to cheat that a little bit by making these kits, but ultimately the slowness is a key component for me. And when I make a collage piece, I'm working from all of this gathered paper. And as you can imagine from looking at it, that didn't happen in an afternoon. And this is a medium of repetition. It's laying out, I work in laying out strips in concentric or swirling lines, which is more of the same, more of that repetition, and then making multiple explorations of those same shapes, those same colors is more of that again. So if you haven't been able to accomplish that repetition, that gathering together in a short time, that is totally fine. Here are some more repetitions of that. As Alex, do you have something to share?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
And maybe this is something that you could share a recommendation. What happens if you're looking at one of, a paper material and you're like, well, there's things on both sides of this that I want to use?
Sucks, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to choose one side or the other, based on the way that I do my work. I know some people like to scan images, that way you can get the other side. That isn't cheating, but my brain still thinks of it as cheating. And I like that aspect of found materials, that you do kind of have to choose. If there's something great on both sides, it's one or the other.
Alrighty, thank you very much. I'm using some of the stuff came in an envelope. Speaking of like found materials, some of the stuff you would put like in an envelope to hold it flat. And I'm currently using that envelope as I cut out text in smaller bits so that I don't lose them.
Right.
It's
I
like
love
because otherwise I know myself and I would lose all of them.
Yeah, I lose stuff all the time. And that's kind of a piece of it too. It can all be a piece of it. All right, some other comments. Danny says, another therapy class I had did a thing where each participant did whatever they wanted on a sheet, and those were cut into strips and assembled side by side. I'd love to think about coordinating a more fine-tuned and more malleable version of that. Joy mentions a collage quilt where materials get sent out and folks all add a square. Those all sound like really cool ideas. A little bit outside the realm of today's workshop, but very exciting for maybe a follow-up event. So I want to move on to another way that you could engage with these materials, engage with these ideas. First, I have to clear all this stuff off my desk. So I will start with another quote, returning to this idea of disease as a work of art or as a method to engage with art. And this is in this book for a reason. We'll talk about it. But the line is, disability is not a brave struggle or courage in the face of adversity. Disability is an art, an ingenious way to live, by the artist and activist Neil Marcus. This is using maybe a different definition of art from fine art, from painting and sculpture. That's a turn of phrase we use where art is something that you do well, through talent and practice, maybe something you do with style. But we've just defined art as composing yourself around about a set of restrictions and making them sing. We've looked at how that definition of art can be applied to specific materials, can be applied to something very tangible, so that it does culminate in visual results on a page, in painting, in sculpture, in collage. So it's not truly a completely different definition. So I want us to look at this again, not as a way to conceptualize disability, but as a way to conceptualize art. Art is an ingenious way to live. I am all in on this definition. My personal definition of art is as expansive as possible. I think that anything that is made with artistic intention is art, and anything that is seen with artistic intention is also art. And that includes how you live. I know there will be some pushback to that definition because it is so broad, but I like that it gets pushback from a certain type of capital A artist. I think that art should be challenging and that can extend to the definition of art. And I want it to be expansive enough to include the people we don't normally think of as artists. Rebecca was mentioning that idea of enjoying thinking about who held these materials before. And I want us to think about artists also as the people who manufacture the materials that are used in our work and that are used in fine art, the people who stretch the canvas, prepare pulp for papermaking, whether that happens on a small artisanal scale or in a big industrial factory. That art and artists can include people who don't think of themselves as artists, but are engaging with their world in a way that values beauty and intentionality and care. So this is another project that I want to show you, and it's what I'm going to work on during our sort of free spaces. I call these my Love Many Things books, and they are really a gathering of every artistic element that I encounter in my life. They represent the people who care about me and the things that I do and see, the interests that I have at any time. My dear friend Ari helped me begin this project with a notebook that they made for me, which has now been through quite a lot. And the book began with this quote: "Love many things and write them down." This is a variation on a quote from Van Gogh. It is so good. It is good to love many things, for therein lies the true strength. And whosoever loves much performs much and can accomplish much. And what is done in love is well done. Or the best way to know God is to love many things. So what I want to bring forwards is the idea that the process of loving things is art, just as much as writing them down. And this is another very slow project. I've been working on these since 2014. This is the first one, and I always have one going. This is the one I'm working on now. Other people have a variation of this project that they call junk journals. I hate that. I do not think that they are junk. They're less considered and more of a direct gathering of things that are meaningful to me than a single work that represents a specific idea. But they are not junk. That's so dismissive and really antithetical to this whole idea of making meaning. And maybe that's what my definition of art is making meaning. These are like scrapbooks, but they don't require that I go anywhere. Again, they just represent that idea of contextualizing myself, my materials contextualizing me, and me contextualizing them, and making meaning from within that. So that's sort of your other way to go about this workshop. You could decorate something around you. You could make a collage on your wall. Anything you do to make your world a little bit more joyful, a little bit more colorful, a little bit more comfortable, whatever the scale of that world is. So if your world, what you feel you can influence, is just your bedroom or your bed or just a backpack, put some art up there. I felt really closed out of art for a while because I didn't have the space in my brain to develop these concepts, to lay out and construct a piece. But what I could do was add a little bit of color and texture and interest, quotes and images and little snippets, stickers every so often, a little bit of something, either to a page or to this notebook or to my belongings. And it did that same work of contextualizing me, of making my space feel like home, and contextualizing those aspects of my world as points of connection and points of liberatory joy. So that is just as much art, and it makes you just as much an artist. I didn't want to conclude this workshop with just this idea that you have to make a collage on a single piece of paper, and if you haven't done that, then you haven't made art. Because I also think that this kind of work helps to build your other works of art also by giving you practice piecing things together, working with your particular medium, and also refining your guiding principles about what you value in your art and what you see as worthwhile to create. So hopefully that gives everyone somewhere to go and something to work from. There is a lot now in the chat in between. No, there's not. There's not that much. Danny says, I love that definition. So often there's a division of things that can be more accessible, like pottery, photography, fiber arts in general as crafts or not real art, when they can be just as intentional. And Ari, who created this first notebook, has given some little hearts in the chat. It's great to come back together like this. So I want to take another chance to hear about if anything from that second component resonated to you, especially if you were struggling to work with the materials to begin with. You weren't really coming towards a structured piece from just the materials provided. How are we feeling? What are we thinking about?
My mind is exploding
Amazing.
because I really appreciate, I don't even like the word restriction, but I'm gonna try to come up with another word for it because I love the concept that,
Yeah.
like having too many choices causes me so much anxiety and overwhelm that I shut down. So that's the other reason, like I was saying, I loved opening my envelope and, like I did get tons of other ideas and I like had to breathe and say, we can do that later. So anyway, but the main thing I want to say is I feel like this whole experience is art. I totally agree with.
Oh no, you've cut out briefly, but
Oh, yeah, that was
there you go.
the art god shutting me up. Okay. Anyway, I have a lot of self-judgment and deprecation about how much I talk because that's just my another form of my self-abuse. But my point is that I feel what I was trying to say is that the whole way that you're guiding and facilitating this is not like it is a work of art. Like art is not just for me a tangible physical visual thing. So I just also wanted to invite that if anyone else like me sometimes gets too in my head about what things look like, it's sometimes I close my eyes and just feel what the texture feels like. You mentioned weight, smelling it, just kind of like mushing it up or doing things with it that it doesn't, like changing not using my head is what I'm really trying to do. Lastly, what I was going to say is I'm already having separation anxiety about when this ends. So I just want to make sure that I say, you're seeing how much of a control freak I am, like everybody else's emails, so that if anybody wants to maybe have an informal, that is the beauty of technology. We could like text each other or email each other stuff we're working on. And then I don't know, this vision I have about like collaborating. I love that you said there's no like copying or cheating or anything like that. Like we could take I could make something with other people, like we could work on something virtually. Does that make any sense? I don't know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I think
Okay.
there's lots of options. This is such an open medium that it can really be
Right,
pursued
right.
in any number of ways. Well, definitely, I'm gonna think about sharing how we want to share to continue working together. I don't just
Okay.
want to put the list of people's emails out there, so we'll talk about it.
Right, right. No, I know it would
but
only be if
yeah,
people are interested, if people were interested.
but
Right.
I really liked what you were saying about this workshopping art. What a lovely compliment.
Oh
And
yeah.
the
Yeah.
process being such a key component no matter what you end up with on the physical page. So that's part of why I
Exactly.
wanted to show these, where the process is really the most important part. It makes it, the act of putting these things down, of working on them, is much more significant to me and represents much more for me than anything that actually ends up on the page. Danny,
Right.
did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, several people have mentioned, hi, I have a voice, I'm a real person. A couple folks have mentioned perfectionism, and that's something that I really struggle with, even in like art therapy, which is strictly process art. It's not about like making it look good, it's about just doing the thing. And something that was actually really helpful for me is working with things that you inherently cannot control. So like finger paints, oil pastels, like things that are harder to really get a whole lot of detail in. Granted, there are oil pastel pieces that are very complicated, but if you're picking up something like a thick marker or finger paints, or we actually did Hot Wheels cars that we dipped in paint as a collaborative project and then ran across a piece of paper. So it's like kind of going in that direction helped me to let go of that, like, I'm not going to do it right because there wasn't really much capacity for me to do a whole lot of control in those processes. So that might be something that could be helpful for folks that are feeling kind of stuck or like that's a limitation for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Working with different mediums, different materials that introduce different paths of creation. And then there's another aspect there of working with something that doesn't last very long. So I use a lot of magazine paper, a lot of catalog paper, and it's very thin. It's not archival quality. And I find that my work doesn't necessarily survive for a long time, which introduces another element where like the process, the act of creating it is really the most significant because it's not going to last for very long. And I love seeing especially not even necessarily performance art, but the kind of art that people make out in the world, environmental art, that will naturally be destroyed at the end of the process. I really appreciate Mukshaif saying, I was dissatisfied with my first piece, so I'm giving myself permission to revisit it later and starting a new composition. That is really wonderful. I think that really enables making, now you have two pieces, you know, and even if you don't come back to one, you still have moved forward and created something. Val says, you've effectively summed up my love for painting as a medium. Much of the piece is determined by the medium itself, and you have to adapt and work alongside it as opposed to controlling it. That's that same aspect of being creative is about working with the materials, listening to that which wants to be done. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad that that resonated with you. And then again, some comments about some of the more specifics of connecting with each other afterwards. We'll definitely, I'm going to think about that. I can't work on both these things at once, but I think that that is a really great idea.
That actually leads to a question, Auden, is that
Yeah.
I know that if I have this, fear that if I don't say something immediately, I won't remember it. And everybody always says, "Oh, just write it down." But like, I guess I feel like the way things evolve is a work of art too. So I'm just gonna try to be more concise as I just got an idea. So I just want to say it because I will forget it. I love how people are talking about, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am, ways to circumvent or work against perfectionism, because that's what paralyzes me. And that, I love that idea. And I love hearing that someone else does things about trying to not control it. Like I make my watercolor paper totally wet with water first and then touch the color and let the water do it rather than my finger. So, but well, anyway, the idea I was going to say is for people that like were interested, obviously this all is to be consensus and voluntary and consensual. I would love to like have someone's snail mail address and like do a little piece and then send it to someone and let go of it and let them add it to it and then send to someone else. There's just something about connecting and collaboration that I've been very lonely and disconnected my whole life. And, so I feel like you are providing like this is a creative experience of art, like how we can keep it going. Okay.
Sure.
Bye.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of forms of collaboration and connection. I love the idea. One thing that I didn't talk about, but I showed these little cards throughout this workshop. I made so many of these cards in so many different colors. They're set up like greeting cards. Specifically at the start of the pandemic, as an art project, because I was feeling so isolated, so disconnected, and I wanted to create something that then would go and have a life of its own. So when you make a greeting card, you can make it however you like. but then it goes out into the world, and the person who gets it then sends it out to another person with a message of their own. And hopefully that message will be thoughtful and intentional. I think that the cards, because of how intentionally created they are, they really encourage that. But it is outside of my control, and what they end up being used to say is outside my control. And I really love that idea. I'm no longer really doing that project, but I made probably, oh, I don't know. There's a lot of people in this room who have gotten cards of mine, but hundreds at least. So that I think is such a wonderful aspect of art, that bringing together found materials is collaboration with the people who develop those materials. And then what you create is inherently a collaboration with whoever sees it. So I love this idea of us making something collaborative together. Again, let's talk about that after the workshop. We'll see about what makes sense to do. Some other comments, Joy says, I like how much of this form mimics the body self itself. In its temporality, its pastiche nature, how we construct ourselves by taking bits of what is around us and making meaning of it. I am just really loving this. Thank you, Auden. Thank you so much. I love that. Yes, I think that human beings are inherently collages. We construct ourselves by taking bits of what is around us and making meaning of it. What excellent phrasing. I think that nothing represents that so well for me than these projects, these Love Many Things books, which is why I wanted to bring them forward. They really represent me, the things that are around me, the things that are meaningful to me, and then putting together in this tangible representation of that. Danny says, I used to do circus work before my body was less able to do that. This link is to a really interesting show that utilizes natural spaces instead of introducing staged pieces. That's excellent. That idea of the space that you're working with, the space that you're working in, using materials, using ways of creating that are impermanent. That's another thing. So much of my work is focused on the very tangible, on stuff that is not digital. I think this is a myth, but we have this idea that if it's on the internet, it's there forever. It achieves some kind of permanence. So I like making something that, by virtue of being very tangible, of being physical, is impermanent. Although again, I think that stuff that is digital is also impermanent, just in a different way. So Fran says,
And then just real practical, I wanted to suggest that I can't afford to buy those notebooks and stuff, so I started using old books that I already read, or like
yeah,
when they give out free books at the library or whatever, you can use books. And like sometimes I just, like, for fun, look at them as, like, tarot cards, like pick out a word and then, you know what I mean? Like, you can use books
sure.
as, yeah.
Yeah, that idea. I think there's like found poetry, which uses an element of that with the written word too much. That's just a variation on found materials collage. But as you were saying, but art materials, art supplies can be so expensive. I love that this is a medium that is open to whatever you have available to you. If you have art supplies that have been donated to you or you've saved from some project, that's great. If you don't, if you're just working with, like you said, books that you read before that you got from the library, that is also not that you checked out from the library, but that you got from the library sale, then I think that is also a wonderful method. Fran is sharing, I am using some photos and color paint cards from the hardware store. Then I just decided I need to use some lit matches. That sounds really interesting. That aspect of the color paint cards is what we're saying about free and easily accessible materials. but something's going on with those lit matches that I would love to hear more about. Beth says, I have sent those cards many times to people who have lost someone, talking about these cards of mine. Beth is my mom. With a note that says, they are just like a life, put together of so many little beautiful pieces to make a unique whole life. Little snapshots.
Beautiful.
I love
You
that.
also just gave me an idea, Auden, that
Mhm.
I have like, you know, I don't want to throw away anything because everything's a potential,
That
but
can be tough.
especially even scribbles or, you know, watercolor sketches, I could rip them up and use them as collage material.
Yeah, I think anything can be material. That can be a great way to drown in paper. I'm
Right.
definitely getting there. But I try and think about, you know, if everything is a potential art material, then it's okay if I let go of something because something new will come into my life and I'll be able to use that as well.
Right. Right.
So instead
I
of
just mean
like
like
getting
drawings that I've done that I don't want to let go of. I have piles of them, but I could rip them up into smaller pieces.
great idea. Danny is commenting on the reply from Beth to say, I've done finishing work on crochet or knit pieces that someone hadn't finished before they passed away and added a small angel wing motif or improvised when there wasn't enough material or pieces were unfinished. I love that. I have heard about that kind of project before. Of finishing projects, particularly, you know, textile projects that someone else has made. That is such a form of collaboration. I think that is, you know, one of the most, when you're able to collaborate with somebody you love who has died, that is wonderful. It's also great to be able to collaborate with someone you have never met, especially to finish that kind of project. I will share in this Google Drive an article that I read about finishing quilts. There's an organization that does that. I'll share that. I love that stuff. From Joy, there's found poetry and redaction poetry too. This is what I was saying earlier, which takes those found materials and often blacks pieces out. I have seen some interesting work from disabled poets using both found and redacted work, sometimes using medical or governmental documents. Sometimes redaction is called blackout poems if you want to look for them. Yeah, that sounds, Tahila, I don't know how to pronounce your name. That sounds like it would be something really interesting for you. Danny says, I have a friend that does redacted poems. It's a very interesting concept because there are restrictions. That's, I think, any medium of art has restrictions, but I love working in these where those restrictions are very evident. You can see what it is that you're working with and what your limits are. So does anyone else have anything that they want to share? We can have some open-ended work time and conversation here. This would also be a great time if we did want to talk about some of these more technical elements. If you would like some guidance on how to make the kind of swirly projects that I make, now would be a good time to talk about that. Or we can just have some quiet time and work with whatever fits the needs of the people who are here. Beth says yes to swirls. Great. So you've seen some of my swirly stuff today. I work with these concentric circles like this, and also with these sort of interlocking, yeah, I just call them swirls. But here is sort of a guide for how to do that. If you have one of the materials kits, it has in it a tape roll like this. It is 1/4 inch tape, double-sided. I take this tape and now my desk is absolutely covered in paper as usual. So I take this tape and a small piece of paper in whatever color or texture that I'm interested in. And I lay the tape along the edge in a single strip, cut that strip, and fold it and tear it. You can cut it instead. I like to tear it because I like the little bit of texture that it gives at the edge. And I like using the line of the tape backing to make a good straight line there. So then I take the strip that I have here, which looks like this when it's stuck down on the page, and I lay it out in little tiny sections, end to end to end. And you can do that either in that concentric circle shape. You want to see my work surface a little bit better? Is that better? Can you see my work surface appropriately?
Would it be useful if for this part of the workshop, I unpinned your speaking face for folks?
Sure.
Okay, we'll try that.
I take a little bit of paper, collage paper, chosen from those found materials. And then, as you can see, this is from, it looks like a Heifer International brochure. Then I back it with a strip of 1/4 inch double-sided tape, fold it and tear it so that I end up with the strip like this. And then I take that strip and I cut it into little sections and lay those out end to end. So here's what it looks like with some space between those sections. And here's with those sections laid end to end. You can see you lose a fair amount of the original piece. This is the same length here as this one that has been made curvy. So that is the basic process. And then I lay those out connected to each other to make this sort of braided swirly line like that.
Are they cut up pieces or do you rip those pieces too?
I rip them into the strips and then I cut them into little sections from there.
Okay, like mosaics. Yeah.
Yes, like a mosaic. So yeah, then I lay out each of those strips in kind of this overlapping mechanism. Or you can lay them out next to each other to get that concentric sort of shape. So here's what they look like finished in the concentric half circles. And here's what the same paper looks like when it is finally laid out with all of these segments interlocking, laid out together to create that sort of mosaic. Danny asked, was there a particular rationale or process you used to decide what size or width worked for you for your pieces? I'm assuming you mean with this particular kind of technique. I've tried a lot of different widths of tape. I find that 1/8 of an inch is too small. It doesn't tear well. It doesn't make strong strips, although I still use it for some little detail. So this is the 1/8 of an inch compared to the 1/4 inch. I also have, I believe the kits also have 1 inch double-sided tape as well. So there's lots of different sizes. I find that the 1/4 inch is just, I like it for doing this kind of work. I think it fills a space pretty well. without each section being so large that then you're focused on what the components are in the image. So with something like maps, where the image that makes up the strips is very complex, there's a lot to look at in there. I like really narrowing it down to just that very specific component. But they make this double-sided tape in a lot of different widths. Here is 2-inch and 3-inch as well. And I have 5-inch, but that is too big to use at all. So there's my selection of 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, 1, 2, and 3. Other questions? about the
Yeah,
schedule process?
technically, I didn't understand till I saw you bigger. Are you saying that you put the paper, it's double-sided, the tape?
Mm-hmm.
You put the paper on one side and then when you cut it, it sticks on the other side, like you're making stickers, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm making stickers, little
Wow.
thin strip stickers, or I use this thicker width of tape to back
Mhm.
whole images. So that's the
Mm,
kind of thing that I use to fill these Love Many Things books, is these images to stick down photos, to stick down text. I
I
use those bigger widths of tape.
Right, so
Sabrina
you don't
says,
have to use glue, you don't have to use a glue stick.
yeah, I don't like using glue.
No.
It's sticky, it's messy. It doesn't match well with me in a sensory tactile way. So I don't use glue hardly at all. I work almost entirely with this tape. Sabrina
Thank
says,
you. Yeah.
if it's not a straight line, like we're using a cutout of a bird from the magazine, how do we get it to stick to the paper? So you can use this 1/4 inch tape to back even a larger image, or you can use the other widths of tape, or of course you can use glue or another adhesive method. So let's see. Here is a little Hello Kitty shape, and I will back it with this 1-inch tape. There's cat hair on there. And then I can cut it out from there to remove this excess sticky part. Or you can cut it, I find that it is easiest to take a square image, apply the tape in a complete grid against the back, and then cut it out so that you're not working against the stickiness, you're just working with the backing. You can also use an X-Acto knife for this more precise stuff. Other technical questions? Cindy, did I answer your question about weights of paper, or is that something you're still playing with? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, you answered that question.
Great.
I'm really enjoying seeing your techniques demonstrated.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, me too. The visuals are really helpful. I wonder if you could even, have you ever put the sticky down, like let's say you were using a square, and then you could cut out the pieces or rip them and stick them onto the sticky instead of the sticky on the images?
Yes, you can.
Does that make
stick the
sense?
paper- Yeah, you can stick the paper onto the sticky. But it ends up being basically the same thing, because then you flip it over and you have the paper on the other side. So I think that it's just something you should play around with and see
Yeah.
what works best for you. So here's an example. Here is a little piece from Eloise. and I cut this out of a magazine. But first it was in a square. I have already backed this with the double-sided tape to basically make myself a little sticker. Christina says, thank you. I am so glad to have had you here. Thank you so much. Other questions, other ideas that have come up for you, explorations? How are your original pieces going? Are you still working on them? Have you switched to something else?
Yeah, that would be great. Is there a way to see people's, not just in the gallery view? Like, Beth, I see that you held it up, but how do I
This is
see?
Bob's.
Yeah, so there is a spot in the Google Drive for people to upload their finished projects.
Oh,
I'm
great.
looking at, can we pin? Okay, I have
Yeah.
spotlighted you.
Okay, these are Bob's.
Great. So this has some maps, some image from a comic.
Mm.
And
I
also-
love that. Oh.
Art is an ingenious way to live. Some
Oh.
really excellent shapes here. I really love this. And did you work with the materials in the kit? Did you bring anything in from other sources?
Some of both, mostly the kit, and then we found an old calendar, which was mine's still in process.
Awesome. I like that there are different images of plants that seem like they're from different sources. They're on different kind of types of paper. I love, again, bringing images from different locations that are of the same kind of topics.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really interesting way to bring things in conversation. Let's see.
I just want to say too, I think a lot about that limiting, like limiting your resources or limiting stuff. And I use that a lot. I play jazz piano, and when I run out of ideas, I find if I limit and limit and limit, then I have something to start to work with. So that's another reason like getting this kit was so great. To just have a starting point is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I thank you. I think I like the word limit better than restriction.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Even
that
though
makes
they
a lot of sense.
probably, yeah, that's the problem with words, it's like, it just triggers me restriction, but limit is like, oh, that helped. Yeah, thank you, Beth.
So let's see. If you raise your hand in the call, I will spotlight you to show your stuff. Let's see. It's just gonna take me a minute to get there. There we go. Thank you. And I will remove my spotlight. Yes.
I unmuted successfully. Okay. This is Valerie's piece.
I need to zoom in.
Tell us about it.
Valerie, tell us about it.
Okay, here we go. So there was a strip, this one right here. It was of a cityscape. It looked very neatly cut to show all of the buildings, to be kind of that kind of thing. I looked on the back and it appeared to have a picture of somebody's yearbook. So I cut out the faces of the people in that back advertisement and decided I was going to use that. I used an orange to kind of a yellow, 2 pieces of paper, one starting here, kind of extending out that way, as the background. It's supposed to be about invisible disability. I tried to keep a consistent coloring and somewhat pleasant imagery, water, forests, buildings, normalcy, if you will. And then when you get to them here, I've kind of left the faces dangling from the bottoms, almost like masks that have fallen off. And I find that most people associate the pain of chronic pain to like a burning feeling. And that's kind of what's happening here with the yellow and the orange inside, in relation to the green and blue being associated with things like peace, contentment, you know, the associations with nature and water, things that generally make people feel good. Where when you have an invisible disability, something that people can't point at and say, oh, you're disabled because of this, and you have to explain to people, no, I just am in pain all the time. You know, this is a feeling I think a lot of people have had to deal with, where you're like, yeah, I just have an all body migraine every day. So even though I'm, let's say, at the beach and everyone else is having a lot of fun, I'm currently having the worst day of my life because I'm away from either air conditioning or the naproxen I take once a day to get through it. So that was kind of the thing happening with this.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Think
Have
it
not-
has, yeah.
But
My piece over yonder, I am trying to do Auden's little tessellated collage swirl technique. And
I love it.
from having seen Auden's art over the years, that it is an acquired skill and they've gotten better at it. And also I like that you can tell I am new at it.
I love that. I love looking at this. I like that you are using the same piece of paper to make the lines that go next to each other. Sometimes I do them of the same, sometimes different, and it is so fun to see the results that happen. Can you tell us more about the rest of the piece? Or you don't have to.
Okay, I tried to find sections of text for it that I thought went together, and I guess my piece is also about disability and chronic pain. So this is a little section. This was also from a commercial piece of a magazine, and I have bits like from comics recontextualized about I don't know, invisible illness and how you kind of have to work harder to attain the same baseline that other people like who don't experience, you know, chronic illness and pain have. Like they're just you know, my capacity, my spoons, as it were, to reference Christine Miss Arandino, you know, like we just have different capacities and ability levels, and you have to kind of ration like what you're going to do in the day to like be a person. And then I'm trying to kind of like celebrate that. I don't know, maybe it's my Judaism that I find there's a lot of beauty in struggling. And I don't think that's inherently more valuable to try really hard, but something I incorporate in my life and my art. That's my piece.
Yeah, I love that. You have some amazing text that you've pulled in there. That is really incredible. And again, that idea, disability is not a brave struggle or courage in the face of adversity. It is an ingenious way to live. I think that brings together those ideas that like struggle and suffering can have value. They can create meaning. They're not meaningful in and of themselves, but they can generate, they can create space for that. They can create, yeah, they can help you develop those elements. I got a little lost on that one. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to share? We're coming up close to time. Again, all right, Kevy, yes, please share.
Yeah.
We'll
So
you. Yes.
like I mentioned earlier, I've just been so interested in this like New Orleans thing and just trying to bring color and life into
Yeah,
it.
I'm so excited to see where you've gone.
Yeah. So I
Oh,
found
interesting.
manatee. I was like, yay, manatees. And then I found my friend Miss Fousey, and I was like, let's put her on there. And then there's Christine Baranski and a bird. So I'm just having fun adding color and making things different.
That's awesome. That looks great. I love adding color, making things different. Thank you so much for sharing. Again, everyone, you can share your stuff in the Google Drive folder, or if that is a little complicated, you're welcome to email it directly to me. I would love to talk to you further about this. Yeah, we're getting close to the end. We have had some really amazing time for collaboration. Please continue working on your pieces, or hopefully it will inspire you to create art in whatever way makes most sense for you. I'm so glad that you were able to join me this morning here in my bedroom to wherever it is that you are. And yeah, thanks so much.